Hello, I'm Michael Voris.
And I'm Father Pablo, Catholic missionary priest. We really want you to watch every week the one true faith. Had you left that one true faith, please come home. We're waiting for you because we love you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the One True Faith, the show we say is the most disturbing hour on television because we talk about where we're going to spend eternity. Very disturbing subject. And our topics for this season are actually pretty disturbing in their own right. We are spending the entire season talking about the occult, 13 episodes talking about the occult, because occultism has come back in a very big way under all sorts of various different forms in different media outlets and movies and TV shows and magazines and psychic hotlines and everything else on TV and throughout the media. It's making a huge comeback in the American culture. It also has a horrible effect on children because this is always packaged to look good and fun and kind of cool for children or young adults. They're like, oh, this is kind of cool. So they break out a Ouija board. Oh, let's sit around and have a seance after I have a couple of beers and stuff. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. The black arts are extremely dangerous, and that's why we're doing this entire season on this. Tonight we're going to be talking specifically about the subject of fortune telling. That all seems very innocent, doesn't it? Oh, you go to some person, get your fortune read, doesn't seem like that big of a deal. When we think about fortune telling, what kind of comes to mind right away? Some old craggy-faced old woman with a weird scarf around her head and some big hoopy earrings and looking at the crystal ball, talking with a weird accent and a very dire kind of warning voice, and that's what we think of. Thanks, Hollywood. Appreciate the image there. Now, there is some truth, to be certain. There is some truth to that image. Fortune-telling gypsies have a very long history throughout all of Europe for about 500 years, 600 years or so, of going around pretending to divine the future by gazing into their crystal balls in the back of horse-drawn wagons in little, deserted places out in the forest. They read cards or they look at crystal balls, they read palms, all that stuff. There's certainly an element of truth to that. But those objects, a crystal ball or reading cards or reading your palms, those things represent just a very tiny sliver in the world of fortune telling, of different types of things that are read by these fortune tellers to sort of figure out what the future is going to be. Lots of people don't realize, as a matter of fact, just how far-flung the whole realm of fortune telling is. You think of fortune telling, you think of a crystal ball or a palm reading, and that's about it. There's something much more than that. There are at least 35 different fields of fortune telling. By looking at different types of things, you can divine the future, they say. 35 different types of things that are involved. We'll go through a couple of them for you. Now, each one of these has its own field and its own sort of rules that go along with it and their own sort of practices. But they're obviously all related because what's the point? The point's to figure out what the future is going to hold. So you go through them. There is something called electromancy, which is the observation of a rooster pecking at grains on the ground. Seriously, I'm not making this up. And so there's a whole field that people read fortunes like doing that. So there is augury. So you stand there as the fortune teller watching the way the birds fly around. And you can divine the future from that. Seriously. There's bibliomancy. You can probably figure out that one. Books. How are the books arranged? Sitting in a library shelf. Honest to God, I'm telling you this is truthful. There's something called chronomancy, which is based on lucky days or lucky months. Seriously. There's something called cybermancy. What? Cybermancy. I went, huh? When I was researching this one, cybermancy, get this. It's the act of surfing the internet for a random web page, and then wherever you happen to stop, you've divined the future from whatever page you happen to be on. Cybermancy. Honest to God. That one has not been around for hundreds of years. That is a serious, accepted form of fortune telling. They say that we're kind of weird, for lighting candles and saying prayers. Then there is gastromancy. Some of those fortunes you probably don't want to know about. It is exactly what it sounds like. Listening to the sounds of a stomach and the rumblings of intestines to divine the future. Honest to God, I would not lie to you. Gastromancy. But there's a little history to gastromancy. See, all of this weird stuff always has some roots back in something. Some of it's ridiculous. Some of it's oh, that's kind of interesting. This one kind of falls under both categories. This is ridiculous and it's kind of interesting. This gastromancy goes all the way back to the Greeks. Of course it does. Everything goes back to the Greeks. They believed that the souls of the dead, in some cases, would take up residence in the stomachs of certain people. And these rumblings and gases and things emanating were the voices of the souls of the dead, and you could contact the souls of the dead, which is necromancy. So you have necromancy, gastromancy, talking to the dead souls in your intestines, and they would tell you what the future held. This practice of being able to speak from the stomach in Latin is called ventriloquism. Oh, yeah, see? Isn't that kind of interesting? It's called ventriloquism. One of the earliest known uses, as a matter of fact, of ventriloquism was at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. That's how the priestess of the Delphi oracle, read the future, listening to the growlings of stomachs. Suppose it depended on what time of day she was listening to those growlings and stuff too. So, now, that practice was very common in some very early different translations of the Bible. It was actually referred to in the Bible. I can't remember what it's called right now, but the original things, some of the original manuscripts of the Bible actually refer to this. The Jews knew all about it in the Old Testament days. Christians knew about it in the New Testament days. This goes way back. So it's probably a large leap from the ventriloquist dummy, which is not the occult, by the way. That's entertainment. So it kind of lost. It took about 1,700 years to lose its importance. Now everybody understands ventriloquism is just a stage act, but that's not what it started off as. Moving on, there is also seromancy. What's seromancy? Reading the fortune by holding a lit candle sideways and watching the wax drip and hit the paper. And however it hits, I can divine the future. You believe this? This is crazy. There is geomancy, which is standing looking at the dirt. And if the wind blows and makes a little trail in the dirt and it goes that way, I don't know, you're going to marry that one. If it blows that way, you're going to die. I don't know, whatever. So there is hydromancy, which is looking at the water. I think that's just going down to the beach, looking at the ocean. Didn't know I was actually fortune telling when I was doing that. There is one that's a very hard word to pronounce. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. Ecstasphy. And that's the only time I'm saying it. It's foretelling the future by scattering the entrails of animals on the ground. Yeah, kind of gross. Yeah. It's probably why they give it such a hard word. There's feng shui. Of course, there's feng shui. What is that? That's observing the harmony of the earth and how buildings are in relation to each other and furniture is in relation to each other. See, you had no idea. See, your fortunes, your futures are all over the place. You just have to tap into them and figure out what they are. There's haruspice, which is observing the livers of sacrificed animals. This is true. And there's, of course, numerology. There's pendulum swinging. Pick up the pendulum, swing it around, and wherever it happens to point on something, you will live to a ripe old age. Yeah, whatever. There's scrying, which is staring into mirrors and figuring out, apparently, that you don't look as young as you used to, which some of the fortunes are right. But scrying was probably the most memorable example we have of that is from what's her face? Snow White, and the and the Seven Dwarfs. Where the witch says, mirror, mirror on the wall. That's what she gets all of her information and her consult from that mirror. That's from scrying, which was a very big, very popular practice in Europe right up until about the 20th century. And in some sort of different pockets of Europe still is a very big thing. It's one of the things fortune tellers use a lot. You see mirrors sometimes in fortune teller tents. There is taromancy. That's the practice of reading tarot cards. Now, Almost everybody's familiar with tarot cards. It's one of the, lots of these are more popular than others. I suppose there's a reason for that. It's easier to pull out a deck of tarot cards than go get the entrails of some animals and scatter them across your living room. Taromancy. Let's talk about tarot cards for a second, because a lot of people really don't know what tarot cards are, sort of a little bit of the history. When you learn the history of them, it's like, bingo, got it. Tarot cards go back a very long way. Playing cards in general, different decks of cards, started appearing in Europe around the early 14th century or so. It's believed they came from Mamluk, Egypt, which was a kind of an area of Egypt that had, it was into an awful lot of games. I think chess came from there, things like that. That it was it was an area given to different forms of board and paper kind of entertainment. Cards, playing cards in general, become popular in a number of regions, but specifically in northern Italy around the 1340s, 1350s, that time frame. And the different decks of cards start to take on different local flavors as they spread throughout. They changed, the French put on the club, the fleur-de-lis, and just different, they put their different things on. Some groups used numbers, others used pictures, and just there's different versions of playing cards. We have our commonly accepted version now of just, the four suits and all that, but they weren't all like that back then. The name tarot card doesn't have some particular mystical origin to it. Lots of researchers believe that it just comes from the name of the Taro River that runs through northern Italy, and that's just how it got its name, because that's the region it was from. For the next 300 or 400 years or so, tarot cards were nothing more than just an innocent game of cards. That's all it was. Nobody looked at tarot cards and was, there's the death card and there's the magician and all that business. And none of that was not the case. It was just like having a deck of cards. Hey, let's sit down and play a little tarot gin rummy. And that's all it was. There was nothing evil, occultist, or anything else associated with them until in 1781, a Swiss Protestant pastor who was a Freemason published a manuscript about religious symbolism. He said in his work that the design of tarot cards harkened all the way back to the pagan gods Isis and Thoth. How did he know that? I don't know. He just said that's the way it was. He published this thing, different people picked up on it, and that association began with tarot cards. It had something to do with pagan gods and goddesses. He also claimed that the word tarot came from the Egyptian words tar, T-A-R, which was Egyptian for royal, and ro, R-O, meaning road. So he put these things together and said tarot cards, in all their religious symbolism, happen to be the way you get on the religious royal highway to secret wisdom and knowledge. So all of this starts building around this. It's ridiculous, isn't it? You think about this stuff, really. You think, you talk about fooling all of the people some of the time. So he claimed that gypsies were the actual descendants of ancient Egyptians. That's where he said the name came from. Gypsy, Egypt. And he said that's where the name came from. And he said the Egyptians, the descendants, the gypsies, brought these cards over, and they had all of these. So you see the connection he's setting up. This is, it comes over to Europe, but it was brought over by descendants of these ancient Egyptians that worshiped these gods from, 2,000 years earlier, blah, blah, blah. So that's all fine and good, but he was saying all this before archaeologists had discovered the Rosetta Stone, before archaeologists had managed to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. Once all of that happened, it was like, this guy's ridiculous. That is not what those words mean, first of all, tarot. It's not what they mean. This stuff's all made up, which it was. Archaeologists found not a shred of evidence to support anything of what this guy was claiming. But by the time the Rosetta Stone comes around, he's long dead, so he doesn't care. Well, he probably does care, but not in the way we're thinking of right now. His fabrications had begun to stick, and all of this stuff became kind of imbued and surrounded with, and the tarot cards, became invested with this spooky stuff and this occult kind of stuff. In fact, they became associated very closely with something called the Book of Thoth. Book of Thoth was a book from Egyptian mythology that was said to contain all kinds of powerful spells and incantations. If you could read this book, you would know the language of the animals. I guess St. Francis got a hold of it. Catholic thing there. You'd be able to cast great spells and control the heavens and the earth. Right. So as part of the language is also anyone who read the book. Now get the philosophical error here. If you read the book, you get all these powers. But anyone who read the book was struck dead by the Egyptian gods. So that's what happened. Shortly after the publication of this guy's manuscript, a Frenchman by the name of Jean-Baptiste, I'm going to butcher this, Alliette, designed a deck of tarot cards. He came up with his own deck and made them. He made them specifically for occultist purposes, and this is where a lot of the stuff starts to come into the cards. The magician, the king, the death, the skeleton thing, this is where all of that starts to come into the cards now. And this is just about the same time. It's the late 1700s kind of time frame when this stuff starts to come in. This guy, Jean-Baptiste Alliette, was the son of a restaurateur. We don't know an awful lot about him, but we do know that his dad owned this restaurant. He was a chef, and his dad used to make all of these kind of weird concoctions in his kitchen. In addition to making, some bon appetit thing, he'd also run off the back and be making some kind of odd dish or concoction or potion or something that people would spirit off to help cure this ill and that ill and secret potion thing. So they think he was kind of into the occult, which is probably where his son learned it also. His name, Jean-Baptiste Alliette, he changed by reversing his last name, which is Atelia. So that's how he's kind of known in history. It's his last name reversed. He styled these cards on the Egyptian mythology, following the lead of the Freemason Protestant minister who had done this whole thing up. This is where tarot cards get their stuff from. Now, by the early 20th century, a man by the name of Aleister Crowley, I recognize that name again, huh? Aleister Crowley had come across tarot cards. Aleister Crowley, if it said occult on it, he bought it. Crowley was a major occultist whose influence was felt throughout the world in occult, in popular entertainment and all sorts of things now. And he's popular even to today. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne has a song about him as one of his hit albums. He and a woman conspired to draw up their own set of tarot cards with all kinds of different drawings and things on them. And it was under his supervision. He was kind of obsessed with these drawings. They were based on the Book of Thoth again. And he's noticed how some guy says this 300 years ago, and see how it just keeps coming back. It just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. It's like a bad penny. And everything's tied to this Book of Thoth, which, by the way, is a mythological book. No one's ever come across it. They've just come across all these references to it. But the book itself, an interesting point here, the book itself was inside a box of ivory, that was inside a box of lead, that was inside a box of copper, that was inside a box of silver, that was inside a box of gold, and all of these keys to get into each one of these layers of boxes were hidden by the Egyptian gods all over the world. So I guess you didn't have to be worried about getting struck dead, because then you could never get the box open. And there was never a place in any of the, at least as far as we know, there was never a place in any of the recorded Egyptian history, at least that they know of, where this book was ever said to be kept. It just existed somewhere, and no one knew anything about it, like where it was. It was never in a temple. It was never anything. It was just there. But there is the big question. Where was this thing? Nobody knows. We know, for example, if you compare something like that, and here's a good way to examine history, the historical claims of the Judeo-Christian belief system versus these mythological things. In the historicity, the historical claim, we know that there was an Ark of the Covenant. We know where it was. In the Jewish writings, it says it was in the temple, in the Holy of Holies. Here's the history of it. It's all over the Old Testament until the Babylonians come and one of the prophets takes it and hides it in a mountain somewhere, and it disappears from history until it reappears in the book of Revelation at the end. We know the history of this box. This box, or 5 boxes, no one knows where it is. There was never a claim. No temple ever said here it is. Nothing. Just some mythological book. Crowley was obsessed with this Book of Thoth thing. And he was obsessed with it to the point that he was obsessed that the drawings that he was using reflect his idea of what the Book of Thoth looked like so precisely. And he kept, this lady was doing the drawings for him. He kept tearing them up and saying, start over, start over. Anyway, it took him so long to do this, and he only approved it so late in life that he never actually lived to see the final publication of the cards themselves, of the tarot cards. He took so long going over them and going over them and going over them. When he finally had the blueprints of them done, he died. So The deck was eventually printed about 20 years later and is still one of the more popular decks of tarot cards around. He even wrote a book. As she was doing the drawing, he was writing a compendium, Aleister Crowley, saying, here's how you use them to divine the future and all of this. So, you buy the cards and you buy the book and you do, I don't know, figure out what to do. It does sort of seem to me that if he knew the future so well, that he'd have told her to draw faster. When we come back, the truth behind fortune telling. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to The One True Faith. Our topic today in the world of the occult is fortune telling. What's the truth about fortune telling? In a word, it's ridiculous. There, thank you for coming. We're glad you came. First of all, it is an insult to Almighty God. And that's the case on two different levels. First, it's humans trying to know what is proper only to God, the future. Only God has access to what the future is. That is the running constant theme, however, throughout the world of the occult. Having access to this secret, forbidden knowledge that you are not supposed to have. It's what the serpent promised in the garden, isn't it? Think about that. What did he promise in the garden? Eat this fruit and your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good from evil. That's what the promise was. Always want to know something. The occult always appeals to our pride, which is why it is always wrapped up with the demonic, because that is the virtue of demons, pride, particularly the big one. Our personal pride, I want to know. I want to know. I want to have all of this power and knowledge. Why? So I can control things. Fortune telling is also an affront to God because what it specifically does is invest certain divine powers into created objects. It's not that the power resides in the person. The power resides in the person to be able to read the divine in these things, whatever they are. So if you're standing there looking at a rooster pecking around for food on the ground, that action contains something of divinity in it that you just are able, because you're the fortune teller or the soothsayer, you're able to pick up on. But that has something of the divine to it, giving you divine knowledge. It obviously has something of the divine that it's a created being and God created it, but beyond that, it invests the divine power into a created object that it does not have. It wants to pretend that the future, access to the future, lies hidden in these things. It's up to the gifted clairvoyant or fortune teller to get access to them. That's rubbish. That's rubbish. It's stupid. It's stupid. Created objects or created beings like humans or angels do not have recourse to knowledge that is proper to God alone. See, if we did, we'd be God. That's the point. It's a funny thing, about the occult and fortune telling. Think about it for a second. People want this knowledge. So these different systems develop about the occult and all the different things the occult claims to be able to do. Why? Why do these systems develop in the first place? Okay, people want power and all, you're fine, but why? What is it? Its very existence, the occult's very existence, reveals at least one aspect of the human heart, this longing to be connected to the spiritual, to the otherworldliness. That somehow this world is not complete. My place in this world is not complete. There's something else out there and I want access to that. Well, okay, we share that, obviously, but that's where the sharing ends. One sociologist a few years back was sort of studying the occult and fortune telling and all of this. He had a very interesting insight. He said, people long to know the future because they know they are going to die. That's a great insight. Now, he was writing from a sociologist's point of view, but there's deep theological truth in that. Everybody's afraid of death, and at least thinking about it. Nobody wants to go to funerals. You feel uncomfortable. Should I go up to the casket? Blah, 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 blah. Everybody always feels very uncomfortable about death. We want to sort of pull away from it, not think about it and everything. So this is somewhat of a way to kind of cheat death. The occult is a way to cheat death. If you know you're going to die X point or whatever, so get as much as you can right now, kind of control your existence, because you know the clock is going to run out and you will not be able to control your existence after that. So I thought it was a very interesting insight when I came across that, but it does make perfect sense. See, we have a sense of time running out. We all know that. We all look in the mirror every morning. Oh, God. Well, some of us. And we want to get what we can out of this time and place, right? That's kind of a natural human reaction. We need to control our destinies, and when we still have some measure of control. These are things that are common to every person that's ever lived, probably from Uga in the cave to us right up to today and everybody in between. It's why emperors want to build empires and why politicians want to rule whatever it is they think they're going to rule, as though they'll never meet God in the face. When you view it in this manner, the attraction of the occult is one of control. That's really what's at the base. What's the knowledge for? Knowledge for the sake of the knowledge. The knowledge is so you can do something with it. And what is that? Control your existence. Control the affairs of the world around you. That's the promise of it. Now, that flies in the face of everything Catholic. Absolutely flies in the face of everything Catholic. We know as Catholics that everything, even the very breath we draw right now, everything is a matter of divine providence. We know that. And St. Paul tells us, all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord. We don't control anything except our wills. That's it. That's it. When we die, every one of us, every human being that's ever lived, the only thing going to God from us is our will, our soul. That's it. Nothing else. You don't get to take your money with you, do all the stuff. You don't get to take all your great intellect with you when you stand in front of the intellect of the universe. Won't matter. Won't matter. What's the funny line? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. We don't control anything. We Catholics know that. Don't be anxious about stuff. Jesus says, don't be anxious. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's affairs, look, there's enough garbage going on today. Leave tomorrow to worry about tomorrow. This is the only way to properly understand the future. Watching roosters pecking around on the ground in order to divine the future is not only dumb, which it is, it's also an offense against God. You have to see these things. Catholics have a wonderful sense of the duality, of the body and the soul, of the temporal and the spiritual, and how they fit together. Everything we do that is sinful affects things on a temporal level as well as a spiritual level, because we are both body and soul. So everything we do, we make a moral choice and it's a wrong choice, it has an effect here and in the next life. It's that wonderful line from the movie Gladiator when they're getting ready to charge the Germans or the Germanian tribe at the beginning, and he says, Maximus is on his horse, and he says, "Men, what you do in life echoes in eternity." Well, you got that right. That's right. Love Gladiator. It's a great show. Watching roosters or surfing the net to land on some random page to figure out if you're going to marry this one or not, or if you're going to invest your money in that. I need to get a hold of that little fundraising gig. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You wouldn't do this with anything else in your life. But people do this routinely. So there's some basic philosophical errors. Forget about the theology for a second. Let's move off the theology and the spiritual and go straight to the philosophical for a moment. Not that philosophy and spirituality are separate, but concentrating on the philosophical. There are basic philosophical errors with the whole notion of fortune telling. First of all, who says that rooster or that computer or your stomach acids have this kind of power? Who says that? Who's the authority that says that? Who are you appealing to that says that? From where does that person, whoever this authority is, where does that person acquire the knowledge to know that your gurgling stomach juices mean one day you're going to be rich? How do they know that? What power of the universe holds all of these secrets in place? If a person says, this is why, well, why? Well, because you were dead. You're going to be dead, and there was a time you weren't born. So all of these rules existed before you, and they'll keep existing after you. So you tapped into them. Well, where did you tap into them? Where's the big book in the sky that says all of this is the case? Okay, I'll admit maybe you found it. Fine. Where is it? Who wrote it? Where did it come from? Where's the whole structure? Who put it in place? How can the clairvoyant or fortune tellers know with any degree of certainty that this mysterious power that set things up like this simply won't change the rules tomorrow? You don't know that, right? You're just tapped into it. You're not the author of it. So if you're standing there listening to that acid reflux, and it means you're going to be wealthy and rich, and you get up tomorrow and you get into your tent and you're listening to another, oh, you're going to be wealthy and rich, and they walk out and get hit by a bus or a camel and die. Ooh, they must have changed. That sound must mean now you're going to die. The entire complete world of fortune telling, and the occult for that matter, but we're talking about fortune telling in general, is built on one huge philosophical error. The future cannot be known in the present. If it was known, it would no longer be the future. Think about that. It's not the future if you know it, because now you know it. So it can't be. Every single thing that flies in the face and offends Catholic teaching has some error in it way down deep. You just find it. And you have the mind of the church, which is the mind of the Holy Spirit, to point out the stupidity. I'm sorry. Error. If you know it now, it's not future anymore. As an aside, if fortune tellers are so great at knowing the future, we can get out of the lofty philosophy and just kind of go out to sort of the mundane. If they're so great at knowing the future, why don't they just divine which stocks are going to take off and invest their money in those and close up their little fortune-telling shops? You know, if you can tell me that I'm going to be rich, why can't you figure it out for yourself? Some of these shows are actually fun to do. But on a more serious note, shouldn't a fortune teller be able to tell you when you're going to die? Sure. Shouldn't a fortune teller be able to tell you if you're going to heaven or hell? I mean, isn't this all bound up in the mysterious power of the universe? Woo! Shouldn't they be able to tell you how many children you're going to have? Shouldn't they be able to tell you all kinds of things that you never actually hear from them? Or is it a matter that what you hear is so general that it could apply to anybody? You know, do you ever wonder, see these sometimes, you know, I used to work in New York, and I'd walk through Times Square, and there were, you know, little gypsy things set up and all that, and people standing there reading the fortune. I never had time, but I always wondered to myself when I saw this, when someone walks up to a fortune teller and she's like, oh, you'll be very blah, 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 $25, please. And then that person moves on. Does the next customer who walks up in line get the same fortune? Why not? I mean, you know, why would you have to, talk about a brain strain. If you have 75 customers a day and they never see each other, why don't you just tell each one of them the same fortune? Day after day, week after week. So here's another question. Which method of fortune telling is the best, meaning more accurate? That's the goal, after all, isn't it? Is to know the future. So if it's to know the future, and there's at least 35 different branches of fortune telling, which one's the best? Huh? Is the hungry rooster more reliable than your growling tummy? What about the crystal ball? Is that more accurate than those two? Is it more dependable to take animal guts and throw them across the yard? Which is more reliable? Which is more truthful? Which is more accurate? Because that's the promise of fortune telling. We will tell you the future. Okay, well, if I go over here and look at the animal guts on the ground, do I get to that? Do I find out what the lotto number is for tonight? Or what? Oh, so if I'm over here and all I find out is I might marry someone who's rich, well, I'm going to go over here and hang out with the animal guts on the ground as opposed to your crystal ball. This makes no sense. None of it makes any sense. It's mind-boggling that people have anything to do with this. If all the psychic powers of the universe emanate from the same source, which is the claim of the occult, of all these things, there's some mysterious force or being or whatever, and all of these powers emanate from them, and some people are just able to tap into these, like their faucets work and other people's don't. But it's all the same source. If that's the case, well then every single fortune should point to the same end, shouldn't it? It's all coming from the same place, right? If you read Gone with the Wind in French and I read it in Spanish and you read it in English, shouldn't we all arrive at the same end? Doesn't matter what language, right? So that would mean that every method would predict the same outcome. Whether you're looking at the rooster or the tummy or the computer or the animal entrails or the sacrificed livers of animals or crystal balls or palm reading, the fortunes should all be the same. Well, we know they're not. We know they're not. So which method is better? Who says which method is better? Based on what? What are the rules that hold all of this stuff together? Where did those rules come from? Fortune telling is a farce. None of these questions can be answered by a fortune teller at all. They can give you a good show and drop into some heavy Romanian accent and, swivel their hands over the ball and put some weird curse on you or something. But that's it. There's no answers, there's no logic, there's nothing behind it. The God of the universe is supremely intelligent. The universe has intelligence and order in it because the creator of the universe has that in him. It is him. That's how the universe got it. The supreme order and intelligence and lover of the universe does not impart stupidity as an access, as a path to him. It's an insult to Almighty God and an activity of the feeble-minded and swindlers to participate in this sort of thing. Now think about this for a second. About 1 million Americans a year call a psychic hotline. 1 million people a year. I'm actually thinking of setting up a small little psychic hotline here in a back room. I'll give you half rates. People pay, no, I'm not. They pay lots of money to hear some temporary worker on the other end of the call just make stuff up. See, well, boy, it's so tempting. We know what the swindlers are up to. Why are the people calling? Why are the people calling? Because they're spiritually void. That's why. They're grasping onto anything possible for spiritual security because they don't have any. This means that in some manner, the church has failed to reach a soul. Millions of souls. And that's probably the saddest aspect of all. The beauty, truth, peace, comfort, all of that comes from the Catholic faith is simply not known to these people. They are hungry, and our food has not reached them. That says about as much about us as it does about them. Are we our brother's keepers? Yes. Yes, we are our brother's keepers. All the evil in the world is due to lukewarm Catholics. Pope St. Pius V said that in the middle of the 16th century. All the evil in the world is due to lukewarm Catholics. And when he says evil, what does he mean? What is evil? It's the lack of what ought to be. Evil is a deprivation, a depriving of something that should be. Holiness, sanctity, knowledge of God, his love, his infinite love for all his creatures. For some human being to not know this is an evil. It is an evil. And it is lukewarm Catholics that have allowed this evil to be perpetrated because we don't stand out and say the truth the way we need to say the truth. Catholics have been given all of this, and we have not shared them with others to the degree we should. And to that degree that we have not shared them, we have participated in this evil. Every time somebody we know, who we love or know or care about or work with or something like that, says something, and you know immediately if there's something wrong with what they're saying, what's morally wrong with it or theologically wrong with it, what lays behind that is evil. Why does that evil exist? Well, it may not be your fault it's there, but it may be your fault it remains. You need to stand up and say what the truth is. Always stand up and say what the truth is. We are given the faith to help ease the spiritual burdens of life, ours and others, eventually obviously to get to heaven, but here on earth to ease the spiritual burdens of life, to try and understand the meaning of suffering and to see it in relation to salvation. Catholics, the Catholic Church baptizes suffering and gives it a meaning and a higher purpose. And when people are suffering and we don't share with them that there is a reason for that suffering, we have failed in our duty to care and love for our brothers. This burden that we are supposed to ease and substitute with, the new burden, is easy. Our blessed Lord tells us that himself. Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest, for my burden is easy and my load is light. Being a Catholic is hard in the sense of making the right choices, but it is the easiest burden because we have to lay our heads on the pillow at night and not think twice. We sleep the sleep of the angels, and we know that one day we'll be in their care. The faith is given us to help get ourselves and others to heaven. It is a person in deep, deep spirit. We can laugh at it. It is funny on one level. We can laugh at it, but it's a person in deep spiritual anxiety who's watching a rooster peck at grains of whatever on the ground to try to figure out whether they should marry somebody, or somebody's looking at, animal livers to find out if they should invest in something, or, what's going to become of their children. It's ridiculous. It's a sad case indeed to watch somebody be swindled out of their money, to hear a pile of fiction as regards their future, and walk out with some degree of happiness and contentment from that. They're paying money to believe a lie. These things are evil. These things are evil because they are presented to man as truths when they are in fact deceptions. And all deceptions derive from the deceiver himself, who cares nothing about easing man's burdens, but only seeks to destroy him. The Catholic Church's teaching is crystal ball clear when it comes to this, particularly fortune telling. Let me share it with you. This is from the Catholic Catechism 21:16. All forms of divination, trying to know the future, are to be rejected. Recourse to Satan or demons, conjuring up the dead, or other practices falsely supposed to unveil the future. Consulting horoscopes, astrology, palm reading, interpretation of omens and lots, the phenomena of clairvoyance, and recourse to mediums all conceal a desire for power over time, history, and in the last analysis, other human beings, as well as a wish to conciliate hidden powers. They contradict the honor, respect, and loving fear that we owe to God alone. Have nothing to do with fortune tellers, and when you are friends, it's over to some fair or something in the summer, let's stop in on the fortune teller. Take your stop and say, no, and here's why. I don't want to offend Almighty God, and I don't want you offending Him either. Be right back with questions right after this. Welcome back to The One True Faith. We're talking about fortune telling, and this is the time we take our questions from the studio audience. So, ma'am, what's your name? Where are you from?
Stacy from Clinton Township.
Hi, Stacy. What's your question?
As you said last week, Ouija boards bring us into direct contact with demons. Mm-hmm. Although ridiculous and senseless, do tarot cards, are they as harmless as they seem? Is there any direct contact with demons?
Whenever you're dealing with something in the occult, it's kind of hard to say if every instance of participating in whatever it is, Ouija boards or tarot cards or crystal balls or whatever, is going to cause that sort of thing to happen, to somehow involve you directly with demonic forces, demonic spirits. The real concern is that it can. And again, I don't know, I suppose you could ask a fortune teller, read your fortune and find out if the next time you go, you're going to have demons involved or not. But there must be some mancy for that. There is it's more than sort of bringing into contact with the demonic. I think it's really the major question here is this an offense to God? That's really, I think, where if you love God, you want to sort of hang out, not worry about what the punishment will be, but worry about hurting somebody, you know what I mean, obviously, offending God, hurting someone that you're supposed to love. Would you go participate in an action that will automatically offend God and damage your relationship with Him, regardless if then the second part happens, which is demonic forces come in also. The question is we don't know the answer to that. If in every instance that's going to happen. It can happen, yes, but I think the larger goal is to concern ourselves about what does this do to my relationship with God? And God strictly forbids it. It is all over the Old Testament and in a number of places in the New. Because again, for the reasons we said during the show. Thanks, Stacy. All right, what's your name? Where are you from?
Lynn from Warren.
Hello, Lynn. What's your question?
Is it okay to ask for a tangible sign from God? Comment on divinization versus discernment.
It's a very good question. asking for a sign from God is something far different than using some sort of magic or trying to acquire powers through the occult where you now act as God. Sure, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for a sign, not for your proof or something. Look, lots of people get to stages in their life where they're really kind of tossed up, but they've prayed, they've meditated, they've consulted with people they think are good counsel for them, good holy counsel for them, and they're truly sort of at a crossroads and they really don't know. It's perfectly fine to say, God, can you help give me some direction in this path or this choice, or I have many multiple choices perhaps. That's absolutely fine. That is kind of the goal of discernment. What is your will for me, God? Help lead me there. That's an entirely different mindset of divinization, which is I'm going to reach out and somehow get a hold of future knowledge and control events myself. One surrenders itself to God, the other tries to be God. Two entirely different philosophies at work there.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, what's your name? Where are you from?
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm from Clinton Township.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
My question was, as you were talking about, only created beings have the knowledge, or do not have the knowledge of the future. Only God does. My question is, what about like angels who, I was taught, can have more of a longer sight than we do, or have more revealed to them. They have more of the bigger picture than we do. But also, I've heard stories of different saints that have been able to tell about other people, and especially like Padre Pio would. People would go to him or talk with him in the confessional, and he'd say, well, what about this? And he had more of a, how would you say that ties into this? Can created beings like that have that? Or is it just something that's revealed to them?
It's revealed to them. A created being, by its nature, does not possess that as a quality natural to it, does not have foresight into the future knowledge, actually. But to whomever God chooses to illumine with His own knowledge, God is free to give His knowledge, which obviously includes knowledge of the future, to whomever He wishes. Particularly in the cases of saints, that is sometimes helpful for souls. When God does something like that, He can give somebody, an individual, human being, a certain illumination of the mind. But these kinds of private gifts, if they remain private, we can't really comment on them. They're private gifts. But if they become public and they're for the good of souls, that's always the reason God elevates the natural, some aspect of the natural to the supernatural for the good of souls. It's miraculous. It's miraculous that Padre Pio, for example, many saints, but you spoke of him, had the ability to be able to read souls, to know the future. These don't spring from him naturally. They're illuminations from God. So too of angels. Now, angels are on a different level, obviously, much different level than we are. But again, to have knowledge of the future would be to have knowledge of all things, and that would make the being, whether it's an angelic being or a human being, omnipotent, which is that quality of God. We don't have that quality. Angels don't have that quality. Even when the angels, the very word means messenger. When an angel messages something, it's at God's command, God's behest, that they go inform and go tell something. So when the angel Gabriel comes to Blessed Mother, and says, you will conceive and bear a son. His name. And so Gabriel knew what was going to happen specifically in this regard. Did the other angels in heaven? We don't know. Is there and to your point also, angels have a much broader intellect than we do. So they can see down the road using their intellect and understand that, this is going to happen because it's the natural flow of things, which is much different than knowing things that they're not supposed to know. So we have a very limited intellectual scope. Angels have a broader one, but it still doesn't encompass knowledge of the future unless God deigns to illumine the angelic mind with whatever foreknowledge He wants to give them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, what's your name? Where are you from?
Deanna Wixom.
Hello, Deanna from Wixom. What's your question?
How can we differentiate between the gift of prophecy, the Holy Spirit, from fortune telling?
Fortune telling, again, it's the philosophical underpinning of it. What is fortune telling? Fortune telling is trying to gain access to knowledge that you don't really have a right to, and you're sort of barging in, taking something that's not yours, versus you're receiving a gift that's freely given to you. Again, it's that whole, to one of the earlier questions, it's that whole point of taking versus being receptive to. Crashing the party versus getting the invitation. You're at the party, but you're there for an entirely different reason, a different purpose. So, and it really goes to a question of sort of a disposition of heart. Somebody who receives any gifts from the Holy Spirit receives them in trust and love and charity and humility. The person who's divining or after divinization is taking it out of pride and control and avarice and all of that. So it springs from two entirely different views of the world, dispositions of the heart. And it really is the difference sort of between the occult and Christianity. Where are you starting from? There may be some things that are similar, as we've raised in a couple of the questions and your question, but the disposition is entirely different, entirely different.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What's your name? Where are you from?
I'm Frank from Dearborn Heights, but I thought you'd know that. Last week and this week, two vastly different shows. I mean, Ouija boards are so serious, and today we're talking about roosters picking at the ground and listening to your upset stomach. It's amazing. So I figure I'd give you a light question to ponder or to answer and think about. You've heard about gateway drugs. Marijuana is a gateway drug to more important stuff. And reading tarot cards or palms or whatever seems like such a lightweight thing. I know it's violation of the first commandment. You put in something else in God's place. But might it be considered a gateway occultic practice?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a very good observation. Spot on. Anything that you get involved in that is from an area that's wrong is going to lead you into more wrong. Of course it will. Nobody's going to be just, I just go get my tarot cards read, because where's your mindset? Where's the mindset there? I want to know something of the future. Okay, well then if you want to know something of the future and you're okay with tarot cards, well, why wouldn't you go to palm reading? And if you're going to do tarot cards and palm reading, why wouldn't you go to scattering bones on the ground and trying to read them, or tea leaves, or psychics, or whatever? Well, it's all part of the same thing. Ouija boards do seem to have, as we discussed in last week's show, they do seem to have a sort of certain evil about them, a more predominant, a greater preponderance of evil about them. But all of this is evil. It's all evil for the reason you just said. It's an offense to God, first of all. But yes, I don't think somebody sits down when they involve themselves with any evil, or at least most people don't sit down and immediately go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. They build up to something. And this is another one of those things. I think that's an excellent observation. When you start to become involved in occult practices, this is the danger of this stuff being exposed to children on TV and TV shows and movies and books and things, because it looks so innocent. And it's like, it's no big deal. It's just a guy with a wand. Well, yeah, but what's behind all of that? Parents have to be so vigilant on this kind of stuff. So, I think all of this kind of stuff is gateway. And what's it a gateway to? It's not a gateway to the Ouija board. It's a gateway to hell, is what it is. You lose touch with God in all of this stuff. Look at poor Aleister Crowley, and God rest his soul. I hope he's in heaven. But here's a guy who dedicated himself, or purgatory. I guess I hope he's in heaven. But here's a guy who dedicated himself to wanting to bring down all the powers of the universe into his own being and manipulate and control everything. That's not godly. What do you do when you die in that sort of state? I mean, these things lead to hell. That's the whole point. That's why Satan invests this temptation into people, pull you off the right spiritual track and put you on the wrong spiritual track, the demonic spiritual track. So yeah, they're all gateway. Some of these things lead to bigger things, but the big things lead to you nowhere.
Thank you much.
Thank you. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back. Just a couple of closing thoughts. Are you Catholic?
Yes.
Wow. You had to think about that? Should we start recording over? Are you Catholic? Yes. All right. Do you care about the salvation of souls? Yes. Then pick up your sword of truth that has been given to you in the sacraments and baptism and go out and fight for the truth. Occult stuff is stupid, mindless, takes people to hell. You know the truth. People sitting at home know the truth. Fight for the faith. Don't worry about what it's going to cost you. You get to heaven, you take a bunch of people with you, and you won't even remember what you paid for it here on earth. God love you. We'll see you next week on The One True Faith.